China versus Japan. Two of the most powerful countries in Asia, two completely different cultures, and two of the world's most fascinating places you can travel. But which country is actually better to visit? I've been to Japan 5 different times now, and every time I've left the country thinking the same thing. This is the future. It's clean, it's efficient, it's unbelievably safe. Everything just works. And after a while, it became my gold standard. I started comparing every other country to Japan. Then I went back to China. And somewhere between paying for lunch with a QR code, stepping into a train station the size of an airport, and wandering through cities where I barely saw any other Western tourists, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. Because Japan and China aren't competing to be the same place. Yes, there's a huge rivalry between these two countries, sure. But the reality is they're building two completely different versions of the future. Japan feels familiar almost instantly. You land, open Google Maps, hop on the train, and within minutes you're already walking around like you understand the rules. China is completely different. Your usual apps don't work. Cash is almost useless. Even simple things like ordering food or getting around require learning an entirely new digital ecosystem. Without the Chinese apps, you're stuck. And that's really what makes this comparison so interesting. Japan has become one of the most popular travel destinations on Earth. Meanwhile, China has reopened itself to international travelers and made visiting easier than ever for many. A little bit of Texas here too in China. The future has come. But almost nobody is talking about what it's actually like to travel there today. And tourist numbers are growing fast in the process. So after spending weeks in both countries, I was left with a question I honestly didn't expect. Which country would I actually choose if I could only visit one? So in this video, I'm going to compare what it's actually like to travel through Japan and China today. Not based on online stereotypes or what the media chooses to cover, but what I actually experienced on the ground. And by the end, you might be surprised which country you'd actually choose, because I know I was. But the biggest difference between Japan and China isn't something you see when you land. It's something you feel the moment you try to do something simple. In Japan, your phone works almost exactly how you'd expect it to. You land, connect to Wi-Fi, open Google Maps, search for a restaurant, pay card or cash, and you're moving around almost immediately. Sure, Japan feels very different culturally from just about anywhere, but digitally it feels very familiar. China is pretty much the opposite. The first thing you realize is that almost everything you normally use has been replaced by something else. It's not just a new app or even a new language. You have to learn an entirely new way of existing quickly. In China, 2 apps basically control everyday life: Alipay and WeChat. To pay for anything, you just use them to scan a QR code, but these aren't just payment apps. They're almost like entire operating systems for daily life. Need a taxi? Use the app. Need food delivered? Use the app. How about train tickets? Use the app. Need to communicate? Use the app. It feels like the entire country has moved into one digital ecosystem, basically because it has. If the future means centralizing everything available online, China's already there. And then there's the part that surprises almost every foreign visitor. Cash is basically disappearing. In Japan, you'll most likely still find yourself carrying coins and buying physical tickets. There are many different payment methods available in different settings, but cash remains king. In China, you can walk into a tiny street food stall, buy something for a few cents, and pay instantly by scanning a QR code. Cash technically still exists, but nobody really uses it anymore. Your phone is your wallet, and even your face can be your payment method. But this convenience comes with a huge learning curve. The digital world you know from home mostly disappears. Google doesn't work, Apple Pay is usually met with a confused look, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, they don't work, and locals in China use alternatives to all of these. Even basic things like maps can become a challenge because the apps you rely on aren't available in the same way. And that's where the contrast between Japan and China becomes so interesting. Japan feels like a futuristic version of the world you already know, and one that's been living that way for decades. Oh my god, it's a security robot. What are you doing, security robot? China feels like stepping into a completely different version of that, almost like a parallel universe. The technology there is incredibly advanced, but you have to learn the rules first. For me, that was probably the biggest adjustment. China wasn't difficult because the infrastructure was bad. It was difficult because everything was so different from everywhere else I'd been. But once you figure out how things work digitally, you still have to figure out how to move around. Funny little things. This is where China starts to completely challenge your expectations. Both Japan and China have some of the best transportation infrastructure in the world. Looks pretty cool, right? But after trying them both out extensively, I think they kind of represent two different philosophies. In Japan, the Shinkansen or bullet trains are pretty crazy. Japan's Shinkansen bullet trains are legendary. The trains are famous for being punctual, clean, and perfectly organized. The seat is also heated and comes with a bidet. Everything feels controlled, calm. You know exactly where to stand, exactly when your train arrives, and exactly what to expect. It's one of those travel experiences where you almost forget you're dealing with a massive transportation system because everything feels so effortless. On board, silence is the norm, and everything comes paired with those quintessential Japanese sound effects and music that accompanies everything in Japan. Basically, transit in Japan isn't just seamless, it's a curated experience. In China, the high-speed rail system is completely different. It quickly became the largest high-speed rail network in the world. And when you walk into the train station in China, the scale is almost impossible to comprehend. A lot of Chinese stations feel more like an airport than a train station. Thousands upon thousands of people move through them at the same time, and they even have security checks. The trains themselves are incredible too, in their own way. They're fast, modern, comfortable, and they connect cities that most international travelers have never even heard of. But China's high-speed rail is surprisingly affordable in comparison. And here's the crazy part. That level of infrastructure doesn't really come with the expensive price tags you might expect. In Japan, the famous JR Pass used to be one of the best travel hacks in the world. But after a roughly 70% price increase back in 2023, it's no longer the obvious bargain that it was. For a lot of travelers, buying individual tickets now makes more sense. Is train travel still fairly priced in Japan? I'd say definitely yes, especially if you're coming from Europe or North America. It's truly one of the best train networks in the whole world. But China's high-speed rail network is surprisingly affordable in comparison. To give you an idea, a journey of roughly 2 hours on the Shinkansen, a route like Tokyo to Nagoya will typically cost you between $70 and $80 US. A similar journey in China, like Beijing to Jinan, takes about the same amount of time, but the ticket costs around $30 US. So you get an incredibly modern high-speed rail experience for less than half the price. But there is a trade-off. Japan gives you precision, China gives you scale. Boarding a Japanese train feels almost peaceful. Boarding a Chinese train feels like a major operation. You go through security checks, your passport gets checked, your bags get scanned by the X-ray machine, and you're surrounded by huge crowds moving through this enormous system. Neither one is necessarily better, they just reflect the countries themselves. Japan has perfected efficiency for a country of 120 million that receives millions more visitors each year. China has built something on a completely different scale. But traveling in this part of the world, there was one problem I kept running into. Because no matter how advanced the trains were, no matter how impressive the infrastructure was, I still needed my phone. I needed my email. I needed to communicate outside of Chinese apps. I wanted to stay up to date with things beyond permitted apps or websites. And honestly, that was the strangest contradiction of traveling through China. I was standing inside some of the most advanced infrastructure I had ever experienced, but at the same time, I couldn't just go and access the digital tools I use every single day. That's why one of the first things I prepare before traveling to China is to make sure I have Surfshark ready to go. When I first traveled to China years ago, I realized a VPN wasn't something I'd just be using from time to time. It's something you genuinely need in the country. Because the apps and websites I use every single day simply don't work the same way in China. Checking Gmail, uploading videos for this channel, keeping up with everything happening back home, even watching Netflix. Without a VPN, accessing many of the services you normally rely on becomes extremely difficult. That's why I use Surfshark. It allows you to stay connected to the services you rely on every day while traveling in a country with a completely different digital environment. And honestly, I use Surfshark outside of China too. Whenever I'm traveling, I want to know my connection is protected when I'm using airport, hotel, or public Wi-Fi. And it's great for unlocking content from different countries while you're abroad. So if you're traveling in Japan and want to watch a show that's only available in your home country's Netflix library, Surfshark can help with that too. And Surfshark isn't just about VPN protection, it does even more than that. Another Surfshark feature I like for travel is alternative ID. When you're constantly signing up for Wi-Fi networks, booking platforms, and local services, you end up giving out your email everywhere. Alternative ID lets you create a separate identity for those situations, helping you keep your real inbox cleaner and your personal data secure. One of the biggest annoyances when traveling is how often you have to give out your personal information. And Surfshark completely solves that problem while keeping you safely connected to the internet. So if you want to protect your data and stay connected for your next trip, use the link in the description for an exclusive discount. Plus, Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it completely risk-free. Thanks so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. And now that we've solved that little issue that makes or breaks a trip to China, let's start exploring what makes traveling through China so different. After experiencing both countries, one thing is immediately clear. Your money goes much further in China. And this is where the timing of visiting these two countries is really interesting. Japan has long been a top tourist destination, but now it's more popular than ever. Millions of visitors are arriving each year, and places like Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka have become some of the most in-demand destinations on the planet. The weak yen has made Japan feel affordable compared to previous years. But the reality is that the most popular experiences now come with a premium. Hotels in major cities can be really expensive. Even a stay at a standard business hotel in Tokyo cost me over $100 a night. Restaurants in tourist areas are packed, and you're often sharing the exact same experiences with thousands of other visitors who had the same idea. Japan still offers incredible value when you compare to places in Europe or North America. But you're paying for certainty. You know the food will be amazing, you know the trains will work, you know the streets will be cleaner than you've ever seen. You know the experience will match what you imagined before arriving, even though it will shock you every time you witness it. China is almost the opposite. International tourism in China is growing quickly, but when you compare it to the size of the country, or even to Japan's tourism boom, there are still far fewer foreign travelers exploring beyond the obvious destinations. And that creates a really strange situation. You have a country with some of the most impressive infrastructure on Earth, massive cities, incredible food, and some of the most fascinating places in Asia, but without the same feeling of being surrounded by international tourism. You can take a high-speed train to a city with millions of people, walk through futuristic neighborhoods, eat incredible food, and sometimes feel like you're the only foreigner there. That feeling is something Japan struggles to offer today. Japan gives you the places you've seen in movies, documentaries, your Instagram feed. China gives you the feeling that you're discovering somewhere new.
This isn't what I thought of when I decided to come to China.
And then there's the cost. If we're talking about pure value, China wins hands down. A meal that would be considered a great experience in China can cost just a few dollars. Hotels, transportation, and everyday expenses are often dramatically cheaper than what you would pay in Japan's major tourist destinations. Again, Japan is not necessarily expensive compared to many Western countries, and I still think you get incredible value for what you pay. But China gives you something that's almost impossible to find elsewhere. World-class infrastructure, massive cities, and unforgettable experiences at a fraction of the cost. So the real question isn't simply which country is cheaper. The answer would be obvious. The real question is, are you willing to trade some convenience and familiarity for a bigger sense of discovery? Visiting Japan, you end up paying more for convenience, familiarity, and a perfectly polished experience. China gives you more for your money, but asks you to put in more effort. And that difference becomes even more obvious when you look at the experience of being a foreigner in each country. Because for me, travel isn't just about how much something costs or how impressive the infrastructure is. It's about something harder to measure. How does a place make you feel? Before I visited China, there was one question I kept hearing from people in various formats. What I think people were really trying to ask me was, is it safe to visit there? And honestly, I think this is one of the biggest gaps between perception and reality. Truthfully, both Japan and China are incredibly safe countries to travel through. Some of the safest in the world. But the reason they feel safe is completely different. In Japan, safety is probably one of the first things any visitor will notice. You can walk through Tokyo or the rural countryside at night safely. You can forget your belongings somewhere and they'll still be there when you come back. Or sometimes someone will track you down to get whatever you lost back to you. As an American living in Germany, the idea of having to look behind my shoulder when I'm walking around at night is kind of second nature to me. In Japan, I just find myself naturally not doing that. But Japan's safety really comes from something deeper: social trust. There is an incredibly strong culture of following the rules, respecting shared spaces, and thinking about how your actions impact everyone around you. The result is a country that feels calm, predictable, almost effortless. China surprised me because it created the same feeling of safety in a completely different way. Before visiting China, I think many people imagine a country that's difficult or intimidating. But walking through Chinese cities, using public transportation, eating at local restaurants, and exploring neighborhoods, I never felt physically unsafe. In fact, some of the things that feel unusual to foreigners at first, the digital systems, the security checks, the sheer organization of public spaces, create an environment that feels extremely controlled. You can definitely walk through a city late at night just like you would in Japan. Taking a train across the country is as safe as could be. You can find yourself exploring places most foreigners have never even heard of. And speaking for myself at least, I genuinely felt comfortable doing it. But the feeling is different. Japan feels safe because everybody understands and lives by social rules. China feels safe because the whole system feels incredibly organized and controlled. And for many Western travelers, the difference is probably one of the biggest cultural adjustments. Japan gives you peace of mind, China gives you confidence to explore. In the end, both countries are among the safest in the world. And that leads to the biggest difference between Japan and China. Not whether you can travel there, but what it actually feels like once you're there. The culture may be unique, but Japan is one of the easiest countries in the world to visit as a foreigner. You can arrive, figure out the trains, find incredible food, explore neighborhoods, and have an amazing experience without ever feeling completely lost. Japan has spent decades building a tourism system that works incredibly well for visitors. Signs are everywhere, instructions are clear, transportation is pretty easy to understand. Even when you're dealing with a language barrier, there's usually a system designed to help you. But there is also something interesting about Japan. You can sometimes feel like you're experiencing a perfectly designed world rather than truly becoming a part of it. You can walk through Tokyo and feel completely comfortable, but also completely anonymous. China for me was pretty much the opposite, maybe because foreigners are much rarer there. China constantly reminded me that I was somewhere different. People were curious, people would look at me, sometimes they wanted to talk. Sometimes even simple things became an adventure because I couldn't rely on my assumptions from everywhere else. Ordering food or finding a place, communicating with someone. Every small interaction there became a kind of story in my head. Honestly, I guess that's a part of what made China so memorable for me. Japan is a country where you can relax as long as you act according to social norms. China is a country where you stay engaged. Japan lets you appreciate the details. China might do that too, but for me it was always the scale of everything that got my attention. And I think that comes down to the biggest cultural difference I noticed. Japan feels like it's built around harmony.
One nice thing about this museum is the entrance is free.
There is a strong focus on rules, consideration, and making sure everyone understands how things work. China feels more energetic. It's louder, it mostly feels faster, it's honestly a little more chaotic. But I think that chaos is a part of the experience. Neither one is better than the other. They're just different ways of experiencing Asia. So after spending time in both countries, which one would I actually choose? Honestly, I don't think there is a simple winner. I've spent months traveling up and down Japan, so it is more familiar to me. China is bigger and I've seen much less of the country. I've still only spent a few weeks in total there, and my most recent visit came after about 8 years of not visiting. But before going back to China, I honestly thought Japan had already set the standard. It seemed like the perfect example of what the future of travel really looked like. So stuff like ultra-clean cities, perfect transportation, amazing food, everything working exactly how it should. And Japan still delivers that better than almost anywhere else in the world. If this is your first trip to Asia, if you're looking for a destination where everything feels magical but still manageable, Japan is probably the easiest, most obvious recommendation I could make. I honestly feel like everyone on Earth deserves the chance to visit there and witness it at least once. There's just nowhere like Japan. But there's also nowhere like China. And China gave me something Japan couldn't. It challenged me. It forced me to rethink what visiting a modern country could look like and showed me a completely different version of the future. In the end, China isn't trying to become Japan, and Japan isn't trying to become China. The two countries have taken completely different paths. Japan has perfected the art of making everything feel effortless. China has built a whole world operating at a scale almost impossible to imagine. After visiting both, I don't think the question is which country is better. The real question, which version of the future do you want to experience? If you want comfort, beauty, and a trip that feels perfectly designed, head to Japan. If you want discovery, unpredictability, and a place that challenges everything you thought you knew about travel, head to China. And it is definitely cheaper there. But honestly, the fact that both of those answers can be true is what makes these two countries incredibly fascinating. So which country will I be visiting? Both. But now I'm curious, if you could only choose one for your next trip, would it be Japan or China? Let us know down in the comments.